The year was 1891, and the small frontier town of Hollow Bend lay quiet under a pale morning sky. Mist drifted low over the fields, curling around the weathered fences and the skeletal remains of last season's crops. It was in that mist that the boy first appeared, small, thin, and dressed in clothing decades out of fashion. The wool of his jacket was worn but clean, his boots scuffed but sturdy, and his cap pulled low over eyes too old for his face. That he walked from the tree line with slow, deliberate steps, as if the world around him was unfamiliar yet unthreatening. The town stirred to life in the distance, the ringing of a blacksmith's hammer, the creak of wagon wheels, but his attention remained fixed ahead, expression calm, almost detached. Though he looked no older than 10, there was a stillness about him that didn't belong to a child. His pale skin caught the faint light, his dark hair lay neatly in place, and his posture held none of the restless energy of youth. There was no sign of panic, no searching glance for a familiar face. The mist seemed to linger around him longer than it should have, curling at his heels before fading into the cold morning air. Hollow Bend had seen strangers before, drifters, traders, wanderers, but this boy's presence carried something different. Something that made the air feel a shade heavier. It would be many years before anyone realized that this morning was the first page in a story the town would never forget. Seasons rolled over Hollow Bend like clockwork. Summers baked the earth until it cracked, autumns painted the trees in fleeting gold, winters swept in with icy winds that rattled loose shutters, and springs brought the soft hum of life back to the prairie. Children were born, grew tall, and left for places far beyond the horizon. Faces in town aged, softened, and eventually vanished, but Samuel did not change. Year after year, he remained exactly as he had on the morning he arrived. No new lines on his face, no change in height, no shift in the quiet weight of his gaze. The clothes he wore would fray, only to be replaced by garments that somehow looked just as old-fashioned as before. His dark hair never grew longer than it had been, his voice never deepened, and his step never slowed. At first, the townsfolk chalked it up to the tricks of memory. Perhaps he was simply small for his age, perhaps they had imagined his unchanged appearance, but as decades passed, doubt turned into unease. People avoided looking him directly in the eyes, claiming there was something in them, a stillness that felt older than the hills. Whispers began in corners of the saloon and around kitchen tables late at night. Some said he had made a bargain with something not of this world, trading his years for some unknown price. Others murmured he might not be alive at all, but a wandering spirit bound to the town. Parents began warning their children not to wander too close to him, though Samuel himself never caused harm, never spoke unkindly, and never seemed to notice the distance growing between him and everyone else. Life in Hollow Bend moved forward, leaving marks on everyone except the boy who never aged a day. It was a summer afternoon when the photograph surfaced, found in a box of yellowed letters and brittle papers in the attic of the old town hall. The image, taken in 1861, showed a group of settlers standing stiffly before a half-built barn. The photo's edges were frayed, its surface scratched by time, but the faces were clear enough to recognize. In the back row, partially shadowed, stood a boy, the same boy Hollow Bend had seen walking its streets for as long as anyone could remember. His jacket was buttoned to the collar, his cap tilted at the same familiar angle, and his expression carried that same still, unreadable calm. The discovery moved quietly at first, passed between a few curious hands, but it didn't take long before it became the only thing anyone whispered about in town. The date printed in neat ink beneath the photograph made the truth impossible to deny. The image had been taken 30 years before Samuel had supposedly arrived, yet in the picture, he looked exactly as he did now, not a day younger, not a day older. Some tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a relative, a strange coincidence of resemblance, but those who had met his gaze knew better. There was no mistaking those eyes, no mistaking the weight of them. The photograph became more than an object, it became a question the town couldn't answer, a silent accusation that the boy they'd lived alongside was something they didn't understand and perhaps had never truly known at all. The unease that had been quietly brewing in Hollow Bend reached its breaking point after the photograph's discovery. People no longer whispered, they stared. Doors were closed a little faster when Samuel walked by, and the air around him felt heavier, as if the town itself was holding its breath. One autumn morning, the boy was simply gone. His usual place on the weathered bench outside the general store sat empty, the dust on the street undisturbed by his slow, measured steps. No one had seen him leave, no wagon tracks marked his departure, and no note or belonging remained behind. It was as if the prairie had swallowed him whole. For weeks, small search Parties fanned out across the surrounding grasslands, combing riverbanks and abandoned homesteads. Some claimed to have seen a lone figure far out on the horizon at dusk, standing motionless before vanishing into the twilight. Others swore they heard footsteps on empty streets late at night, too light and too deliberate to belong to anyone else, but Samuel never returned. His absence left a hollow in the rhythm of Hollow Bend, a gap people didn't speak of but quietly felt. The bench where he once sat remained untouched, gathering dust and fallen leaves, as if waiting for someone who had no intention of coming back. That it was not relief the town felt, nor was it grief. It was something stranger, an unsettled knowing that whatever Samuel had been, he was still out there somewhere, unchanged, watching time pass for everyone except himself. Years passed, and the boy became a story parents told in hushed voices, a strange piece of Hollow Bend's past that children half believed. The bench where he once sat had long since rotted, and the buildings around it had been replaced or abandoned. Time moved forward for everyone except, it seemed, for him. That it was during a particularly harsh winter, decades after his disappearance, that whispers returned. A rancher riding home at dusk claimed he saw a boy walking along the ridge, his shadow stretching long against the snow. The boy wore a worn jacket and cap, untouched by frost or wind, and though the rancher called out, the figure never turned. In the spring, a traveling merchant swore he saw the same boy on the edge of a distant prairie town, leaning against a fence post and watching the sunset with the same stillness Hollow Bend had known. When the merchant blinked, the boy was gone, leaving nothing but swaying grass and the sound of the wind. These stories spread quietly but stubbornly, like roots under dry earth. Each account matched perfectly the same clothes, the same unchanging face, the same unreadable calm, and though no one could prove it, those who believed knew the truth. Samuel had not aged, not faded, and not forgotten. That he was still out there, moving from town to town, a figure out of place in every photograph and memory he brushed against. For some, he was a warning, for others, a wonder, but for Hollow Bend, he was a reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only remembered.